friends, this is the Fat Man GM again once more. This is Allegheny Uprising. This is my revisitation of the Twilight 2000 game system circa 1980 and early 90s. This particular one is set in Allegheny Mountains of Pennsylvania. Includes the following materials: introductory description of parts of western Maryland, Pennsylvania, deals with various blah blah blah. Designed by William Keith, development Lauren Wiseman, art director Barbie Pratt, and cover art Steve Venter. Steve's does some good cover art. This is some interesting stuff. This is, I don't know, some of you or younger folks may not, you need to probably Google or bone up on it, but for some of us older hats, the 80s, the late 80s, early 90s was rife with these militia organizations and survivalists and things like that that were sometimes overplayed. There were some religious-based organizations and or nut jobs, in my opinion, that were also involved in this sort of stuff, and it was pretty heavy. There was also a fascination with World War III at the time. There was a number of TV series that cropped up. They were limited. There was a few movies. Of course, Road Warrior, the Mad Max stuff was coming out, and which was hyping it or driving the interest of this post-apocalyptic scenario situation out. A series of novels. I've got a set of books called The Survivalist. I don't think they're no longer in print, but you might be able to get them for free somewhere off the internet. Really good books, I think. The Traveler, which was another similar post-apocalyptic, and now the Survivalist. What was interesting about the Survivalist, it begins with the day before the war breaks out, and most of it takes place within the first, say, 2 months. And he's racing around the country trying to find his family and becoming involved in this invasion from Russia, this limited invasion from Russia, and fighting them and helping the government and fighting some of the elements of the government and other, just saying it's very detail oriented and gives a lot of good background information for this style of game if you've never played it. They're all in my storage shed in the back in some boxes, some big plastic totes. Otherwise, I would dearly love to bring out one or two and do a highlight on them. The Traveler, and of course Deathlands, if anybody's familiar with that series. But the Traveler and Deathlands are set really past the World War III scenario. Red Dawn came out in the 80s. No, I'm just saying, right? Just some thoughts. Like I said, once again, I bought this. It was $7, and I bought it circa 1987. $7. Just can't even get used stuff for $7 anymore. Allegheny Uprising, the introduction, referee's notes, the adventure plot. How they got here. Some of the narrative backstory information on a couple, like the Survivalist, the Traveler, Deathlands, as a series. The books deal with these occasional encounters with government buried stockpiles and survival catches that were set up for surviving post-apocalyptic scenarios or other potential civilization-breaking situations, such as an asteroid strike, right? And this particular book, in part, is one of the main goals of the characters is to locate and secure a government catch, SRS 17374-2, before anybody else gets to it. And there's a lot of nice and interesting, valuable materials in there. There's not a massively huge supply, but as a personal note, I have an uncle, or had an uncle, he passed away some years ago, who spent a lot of time in the military, and then when he got out, he got a contract job. He became a truck driver for the U.S. government, and he was a contractor. He often carried unknown cargo from place to place. He was not in his business to know. But when I was a kid, I rode along with him on a couple of these rides just for the sake of running with him and my cousin. And one of them took us to an old Air Force base in Missouri. And I do mean old. It was World War II vintage, shut down. The government still controlled the land, but it wasn't being used as its original capacity. But pretty much it looked abandoned. And we drove up into this thing through a gated section that he had a key to the gate. Drove into what looked like a weedy area, and basically unloaded an 8,000-gallon tanker truck of some kind of flammable material, I'm assuming fuel of some kind, into an underground storage facility there. And why would you have that there? It's called a strategic reserve. And there's strategic reserves, and then there are strategic reserves. So you make of that as you will. So the adventure plot, I want to basically the civilian government. It's implied the civilian government has hired your group to escort a couple of yahoos with them to track down this rumored supply catch and secure it for the government before somebody else gets to it, if it hasn't already been compromised. So United States Civgov currently located in Columbia, Maryland, the general area, blah, blah. Not unheard of. The individual soldiers care little for the politics to dispute beyond which side has the best supply lines. Both governments are, for the moment, outwardly at least, cooperating to a limited extent. Roger Cadwell, and in particular the man who hires the characters, would like to see a breach between the civilian and military governments healed. Might well use the mission as an excuse for incorporating civilian and military personnel in a single joint expedition. There are other possible situations serve as preludes to Allegheny Uprising. Characters would be former military personnel who have since left the military, struck out on their own, which, and such, they would be seeking some way to exchange their military skills for experience for food and equipment. Roger Caldwell will offer them both. They could be members of U.S. Army units such as the 5th Division, who would become temporarily separated from the unit through a marauder attack or a shipwreck. For example, well, we know that most of the 5th Division gets destroyed in Poland, so that's okay. It implies that perhaps they didn't get completely destroyed, and somehow or another, some of it survived long enough to get back home. There you have that. That's not following the script, if you will. They have found themselves stranded in Maryland under suspicious eyes of the civilian government. The characters offered services for food, equipment, transportation, so on. Just talking about where your players could have come from. Then you got to deal with the marauder bands and several very powerful marauder bands that are trying to conquer the region. Preparing for the expedition, players should have some say in the equipment as up to 228th Logistical Department per expedition. Up to 5 Humvees are available as a player character's request. These may be armed with Maw-Deuces or Mark 19 auto grenade launchers. There's other vehicles made available for use, including 5.25 ton utility trucks, FAVs, 2.5 ton cargo trucks. Town missiles will be extremely short supply, but a reasonable supply for other ammunition is available. Details on these vehicles and others given Twilight 2000. Yeah, I got issues on that too. I'm doing that in a different video. Personal weapons, so on and so forth. Support weapons, relief force, radio, passes, referee notes, the mission. Of course, comes the primary mission. The goal is finding and securing the hidden stockpile known as SRS 1737-4-2. This aspect of the mission is absolutely vital, is, and in fact, the whole reason for the mission in the first place. Second, Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, the intelligence agency serving the U.S. government. The civilian side of the government has keen interest in Western Pennsylvania, current situation there. Current CIA plans call for civilian pacification and control of Pittsburgh. in the next 2 years as a first step towards a lot of first steps towards reestablishing civilization. I've noticed, and none of them seem to get to the second step. Third, the population of the Allegheny Mountains and of the Pittsburgh area could well provide strong allies for Maryland branch of the civilian government. Of course, the adventure refuge would be responsible for unfolding plot of the Allegheny Uprising, a situation developed players react to them. Oh yeah. Ending the adventure, further adventures in Pennsylvania. About the module name. Allegheny Uprising is purposely vague on just who is rising up because the adventure module can proceed in one of several possible directions. The marauder bands of western countries claiming to be the de facto government of western Pennsylvania. Inhabitants of the Allegheny Mountains have something the marauder warlords want, i.e. food, and they are resisting the marauder incursions into the mountains. From the marauders' point of view, the inhabitants of the Allegheny Mountains are resisting against what passes for law, order, and government in western Pennsylvania. On the other hand, the refugees who have taken control over western Pennsylvania counties, including Allegheny County, have done so in an unabashed grab for power, which the western Pennsylvanians are resisting in any way they can. So far as the Marauder forces' actions represent the seizure of territory and resources from Harrisburg state government, is the Allegheny County, which has risen up against the rest of Pennsylvania. Neither the inhabitants of the mountains or the inhabitants of western counties are eager to see the United States government reassert itself in the region. Now that the return of the government means return of taxes, assessments, bureaucracy, and the draft, local resistance to civilian government expedition could be construed as an Allegheny uprising against the federal government or what's left of it. Finally, actions as player characters lead to the revolution by inhabitants of the Allegheny County and mountains alike against interloping marauders, a true Allegheny uprising. Just see, there's so many options and opportunities here. It's just crazy. A brief map of the distance from Fredericksburg to Pittsburgh. A successful conclusion. The Allegheny Uprising will end successfully. The marauder power is broken. The catch is recovered. Rather, is it catch? Kashish? Catch? I've always heard both. I've always called it a catch, although I have a tendency to call it kashish because that's how it pronounces. Thanks to my dyslexia. Whether or not the characters complete with their original mission, summoning a convoy to Frederick to move the recovered supplies to Maryland, it may depend on Claire's own ideas and whether any of their Civgov escorts are still alive. Remember the supply catches fail to help the people of western Pennsylvania. The Allegheny warhordes will probably be successful in breaking through the various passes into the mountains and scattering defending militias. Remember, supply catches near Allegheny and elsewhere do not, in fact, exist, except for various small stockpiles used by the militias. Allegheny Uprising is designed to lead the referees and players into several possible future adventures. They may set out in search of other hidden supply catches, following the maps discovered in SRS 1737-4-2. They may elect to remain in Pennsylvania, so on and so forth. Conditions in western Pennsylvania. The land. Alright, so in a nutshell, most of the nuclear strikes did not occur in this region of the state. They were upstate, more towards the heavily industrialized areas, and some of the main, like the state capital, or some of the areas, although I'm not going to stipulate that that's true because I don't want to go digging through here again. I read about it, but I'm not sure on it. I know that this is a largely untouched area from the nuclear war perspective, but they've suffered a lot from the translocation of refugees from the east to the west, and the weather, as well as the deportations and predatory marauding bands who are one man's terrorist group, or marauding band is another man's way of survival, or it's a matter of who's sitting on what side of the fence, staring over the barrel of a gun, I guess. A lot of the mountain folk and small communities up in and these are not technically mountains, but they're mountainous-like regions of ridges, this series of ridges that are low level enough to be not considered mountains, but they're still difficult to get through. There's a lot of areas in central eastern United States that fit that. Some the Appalachians come to mind. Tennessee, areas of Tennessee and Arkansas, areas of Virginia and West Virginia, that that sort of stuff, upper northwest Georgia perhaps, that the fact that it's difficult, the terrain makes it difficult to just roll in and out of. It makes it easier to control and to maintain some semblance of independence, or increase your chances of survival against outside sources. It says that Pennsylvania mountains are not high. The highest peak is State Mount Davis, 3,200 feet. See, not technically a mountain. Well, Hemming, and I was just talking, just pretty much everything I just talked about. Pennsylvania was only lightly touched by nuclear exchanges. Nuclear mushrooms were spread over Philadelphia and the Marcus Hook. But nothing else in the state was hit at all. See, so for the most part, the state is dealing with things like the breakdown of transportation, food distribution, electric fuel, rioting, fires. But the rural areas, however, possessed long-standing traditions of self-reliance, self-sufficiency, continued very much as they have always had, and they want to continue doing so without everybody else coming in and taking their stuff and killing them in the process. And there's talk about evacuation plan, which was retarded. I mean, it meant well. The government meant well, but at the end of the day, it was doomed for failure. East of the mountains, events and encounters, general encounters table. Pennsylvanians living in the mountains viewed with alarm the influx of refugees from both east and west. These, protected by relative seclusion of the Alleghenies, encouraged passers through to keep moving. There was relatively less good farming land on and among the ridges than on the plateau further west. Many inhabitants were well armed and skilled with their guns. If game was plentiful, so were the local hunters, determined to keep outsiders out. By winter of '98, the roads to the mountains were closed. There was little military or government presence in the area. The authority of the state government in Harrisburg did not extend far as the Alleghenies, and most of the locals were, all intents and purposes, independent. They organized local militias and town guards, helped their neighbors, and kept a wary eye on events to the west. By summer 2001, the collapse of civilization in western counties had generated a new crisis. All reserves of food were gone, and it was doubtful the full harvest would be large enough to allow more than 20% of the refugee-dominated population to survive. Marauder bands from the various refugee communities, cantonments, and already laid waste to the farming areas north as far as Lake Erie, and sharp battles with the local militias south of Washington County convinced them that there was little to be gained by seeking food in that direction. Westly, the Ohio River Valley, controlled by marauder bands and roving hungry refugees, pretty much it tells you they want to keep what they got, and that makes sense. And your player characters are going to waltz in the middle of this and somehow or another get to the supply catch and help these people survive, or help the marauders take them over. I guess how you want to look at it. On a note, it talks about this in a couple of the modules. It talks about general encounters, include things like small game, fowl, dogs, deer, bear, so on and so forth. I think as the year progresses, as the starvation situation escalates, you're going to find less and less wild game. Foragers are going to find it more and more difficult to forage because everybody else is doing the same thing. And to some extent, over foraging, over hunting is going to become very problematic. It's going to drive the surviving populations of huntable wildlife to take deep cover to survive themselves, or be eliminated completely from entire regions. This has happened in the past in history, so there's precedence for this sort of thing. Something to be, We got a nice little interesting. I was complaining about this thing the other day, and here we got a little piece. NPC skills and experience level. Experience tables, experience levels, percentages of their occurrence among randomly encountered NPCs, adventure browser, only 10%, blah blah. NPC, yeah, all same basic stuff from the. I'm gonna do one last video when I'm done with this, and it's going to deal with that sort of thing, and it's my gripe. Anyway, excursion in the mountains, the briefing, all your characters need the information on what they're going to do, the so-called allies that are going to be assigned to them, top secret operational orders, striking out conditions western Pennsylvania, the Allegheny warlords, countering marauders. Got a nice map there. And of course we got our general NPC section, and I'm not going to go through all these people. The warlords of western Pennsylvania, the various marauder groups and militia groups of significant power that make yourself want to deal with. Okay, now the catch itself. This one's worth touching on. Much of Allegheny Uprising revolved around the search for and recovery Strategic Reserve Stockpile 1737-4-2. Section describes the catch and its location. The referee is the final judge to specific items that might be found in the catch. The only thing to be borne in mind is that there are two types of things in the stockpile: official government items and unofficial private items stored by bureaucrats connected to the project. A partial list. So this isn't a complete list. The GM can add to what's here if need be, as it is. 500 crates of government records, 1,000 winter parkas, 200 IBM PC computers that are functionable, 400 office electronic typewriters, word processors, 5 M2 Bradleys, 5 2.5-ton trucks, 10 Army FAVs, heavy equipment including bulldozers, tractors, and other pieces of earth-moving equipment, 100 crates of X-rays, 10 tons of freeze-dried canned and dehydrated food, emergency survival rations, 10 tons of seed for various crops. Fuel consists of 2,000 liters of gasoline, 5,000 liters of diesel, 500 liters of machine oil, and small quantities of other lubricants and petroleum products. Medical supplies, extensive medical supplies stored here, things that don't require refrigeration or. So you're going to find a lot of med kits and dried and medication in pill form and things like that, but stuff like whole blood, plasma, liquid stuff are not likely to be included because it's not going to survive. Personal and doctor medical kits as well as surgical instruments are included. Several tons of unrefined morphine is also stored here, but no arrangements made for purification or processing it into a usable form. Strategic metals, generators of all size, secret maps and records, including potentially some other maps to other supply catches. Miscellaneous items. Various luxury goods which they felt in high demand. Items present best left, such as the NFL game videotapes mentioned in introduction, fall in this category. Some surplus military weapons will be present. This is not an armory, though, and I make a point of that. So you're not going to find huge stockpiles of weapons and heavy weapons. Mostly what you're going to find is some crates of M16s and pistols and light personal gear, that kind of stuff. But who knows what else might be in here. When detailing the catch contest, referee keep in mind they were depots of origins. It began as a small personal catch established illegally with taxpayer appropriations by a single bureaucrat for his own family's use. When he submitted his appropriations for request for review, other bureaucrats and politicians added to the original list and increased the appropriations to cover the additions. Eventually, what started out as a personal survival retreat costing perhaps $50,000 became a huge storehouse worth $50 million or more. So there's lots. Now we get into the section on the actual location, and they give you roughly 7 possible different locations. And when I think, what's interesting, so you as the referee, as the GM, you can make a lot of options here. So it doesn't have to always come out the same way. And then how it plays out. Here's for example, Allegheny Tunnel. The Allegheny Tunnel lies in Pennsylvania Turnpike east in eastern Somerset County, midway between Somerset and Bedford. Passes through the Allegheny Mountains. The ridge has been given the name to this entire region. The tunnel is long, straight, 2001, remarkably good condition considering it's no longer kept in repair. So the storage catch itself will be broad, low, singly unlit room with record supplies and equipment created stacked on wooden pallets. Around clue of the catch, he said, said rumor are, hell, the government's always throwing its weight around, never knew what the hell they were doing. Like, a few years back, I remember just before the war, they came in and shut down the tunnel for a while, claimed a big military convoy was coming up the turnpike. They had me with a crew that was keeping eastbound traffic off the section of the turnpike, and the convoy never did come through. Those idiots had us tying up traffic all along the turnpike for 6 solid hours, and the convoy never showed up. If questioned further, the speaker, who was either a member of a military unit, state police, or a road worker at the time, will say that he was stationed at Somerset, the first turnpike east exit west of the Allegheny Tunnel, keeping a section of the turnpike east of Somerset free of traffic. Convoy was supposedly to arrive east early that morning. It never did. Reason, of course, was that it stopped in the tunnel and unloaded its cargo and then went back to Washington, D.C. It's just using it as a possible scenario of how this thing played out. So we got all the different locations. And then we got the land, part one, our favored rumor mill. Rumor J, have you heard there's supposed to be a giant storehouse full of food and weapons hidden at Ligonier? Guy I talked to says they got enough stuff there to last for years. Rumor N, this character that calls himself the White Death. I hear he's got some sort of capital set up out towards Pittsburgh someplace. Not in Pittsburgh, but in Monroeville, east of there. You want to run into the White Death? There's the place to go. Lots of different. I got actually almost 2 pages of rumors. This is pretty extensive. And then we get into the surrounding communities. Frederick, Hagerstown, Cumberland, various interstate, Route 15, Route 70, Route 40, Clear Springs, Counters, Potomac River, Pennsylvania Mountains, my bookmark, New Stanton, Western County, so on and so forth. And there we go. Pretty much wrapping it all up. There you have it. Allegheny Uprising. Now, as I was saying, your characters could find his stuff and set themselves up as warlords. Set themselves up in there. Basically, got all the materials you need to outfit a really powerful small operation. Pick a village or a community or a town, take over, and change the entire menu or mindset of how you play the game. That's an option. Of course, you're also working to support, potentially for the government or two different governments or whatever, so on, however you want to play that out. It's an interesting concept. And the idea of becoming supply hunters, where you go running around the country trying to find, locate, and secure or recover government facility or storage facilities or strategic reserves, is also potential for another set of games. I mean, technically, I think that takes the game in an entirely different level or direction, which changes the vibe of the game itself. But that's part of the nature of games in general. And if that's how your character base wants to go, rock on. So there you got it. This is Allegheny Uprising, and as always, I hope to hear some commentary from some of you folks, and look forward to it. Hope you enjoy the videos, and I have several more to do yet. I'm not going to do them today, of course, but we will work our way through my collection. I think I've got 4 or 5 more modules left to cover. Don't quote me on that. I know I got Lords of the Ozarks for sure, and I have to dig around and see, because I might be getting closer to the end than I think. It's hard for me to be sure, and I know I've covered, I've covered this one, or I have not covered this one yet. This one I have covered, and there's still some up here in the overhead I got to go through and make sure what I'm done with I take back to my storage locker so that I don't lose them, and dig around, make sure I got everything else. So there you have it. There's Fatman, and as always, Pokemon.